everybody to Will I Be Teaching Face-to-Face or virtually? Regardless of the mode, I'm going to support you this morning in how to prepare for really good quality science instruction, regardless of what school looks like in the fall. And so before we get into the nitty-gritty, I just want to take a moment and introduce myself. My name is Lauren Beal. I supervise the curriculum and instruction team at IU13, but my background is science. I'm a former middle school and high school science teacher, and my passion is definitely science education. So I'm excited for our conversation today. I want today's session to be informational, but also an opportunity for you to collaborate, think about the fall for yourself and for your planning purposes, and to really brainstorm with your peers that are on this call this morning. So to get started, if you could just take a minute in the chat and can you respond to the following question? What are your hopes? What are your concerns, and what questions do you have about teaching in the fall? And I know that this is really a loaded question right now with so much unknown, but I'd love to just get a feel for where you're at so that I can make sure that this session supports kind of your thinking at this point in time. So I'm going to be quiet for a moment and give you a second to reflect. So I see in the chat quite a bit of concern over the management of planning for both virtual and live, because I know a lot of your districts are planning for a blended model where your students will be in several days a week, but also asynchronous several days a week. So you have a legitimate concern with the planning on that. Engaging students in hands-on investigations, big concern in our discipline. So we'll definitely talk through that today. Yeah, social distancing and how to provide collaborative activities and how to do labs that take several days. These are all legitimate questions. And so I will try to provide you with some supports, but I definitely want to open it up to you guys. You're a wealth of knowledge on this call to really share with one another some tips and tricks that you're thinking, as well as we plan for starting strong in the fall. So I wanted to begin today with a little bit of data because we're science people and we love this kind of stuff. So there's been a lot of research over the years around what they've coined the term summer slide. And it's referring to the learning loss that students experience over the several months of summer vacation. And what researchers have done is they've projected how that learning loss will continue now that students have not only been out from June through August, but a lot of students have had limited educational experiences since mid-March. And so we don't have any specific science projections. This one is for math. But when you look at the solid line is typical summer learning loss, and the dotted line is what they're calling the COVID slide. That would be the learning loss now with those additional 3 months compounded onto traditional summer learning loss. And when you look at that, especially in the elementary grades, there is significant learning loss for several students that will be entering your classroom. And if we think about the forecast for math is a very similar discipline to us as scientists. We could expect something quite similar. So that's scary. What does that mean for us as we begin the school year? So it's really easy for us to think, okay, we're gonna have to spend the whole first marking period or even just the first month of school reviewing all the stuff they missed over those last 3 months or the last marking period. It's also easy for us to say, all right, I'm gonna have to remove units and I'm gonna have to skip some things to teach for the sake of covering all the stuff they missed. The other thought that's easy for us to think is, I need to get rid of all the hands-on projects, all the rigorous content, all the stuff that takes time so that I can make up for what they missed and still cover my content. And I wanna caution us from thinking that way. That's our logical thinking, but what happens is that's looking at the learning loss from a deficit model. And if we do that, it only widens the learning loss for students who fell behind because they will never get access or it will continue to delay their access to on-grade level content. And when we look at research around low-income students, students with disabilities, students with English language learning needs, or students of color, this becomes even exponentially grown. There's some really interesting research studies that you may enjoy reading related to Hurricane Katrina and the learning loss for students who are out of school for almost an entire year, and how they were never able to make up the work that they missed. They were never able to get on grade level content, and that had lifelong effects on these students as they exited the school system. So if we take those lessons learned from Hurricane Katrina, what does that tell us based on this COVID slide and where our students are going to be coming to us in just a few short weeks? So the first thing I want to suggest is the importance of starting with grade level content. So even though we know our students have missed a marking period of content, we can't assume that all learning was lost. Some kids may have had very limited education experience in that time. Some kids may have had a really great learning experience over those couple months. The bottom line is we need to start the year day one with grade level content. Because if we don't do that, as I said earlier, our students will never receive that on-level content, and we will constantly perpetrate this cycle where they will always be behind and catching up. So there are some really great resources to support on grade level content if you're not quite sure where to begin in the fall. PDE's SAS website has some awesome curricular frameworks for science and learning progressions that you may find very useful. So if I just click on, this is on the SAS website, and I click down to science, educators have created these curriculum maps for every single grade level. If you are not sure what I mean by grade level content or where to begin, these curricular frameworks can be really helpful for you so that you know that you're still giving students grade level appropriate materials from day one. The second thing I want to highlight is also on SAS, and these are the PDE learning progressions. And clicking on the SAS website, if you scroll down, they have them for ELA, math, and science. And when you open the document, it can be a little overwhelming at first. I don't want to freak you out when we open it. But it gives every single piece of eligible content and anchor assessments, and it tells you at what grade level students should be exposed to it and when students should master it. So to start the year off strong, you may want to review these learning progressions on SAS to have a feel for what is grade level appropriate for me and what are some things that may not have been introduced last year, but are prerequisite knowledge for students for this year. So you just kind of have an idea of where your students will be. So those are two great resources on the SAS website to help you begin the year off strong with grade level content. I'm going to take a moment. I see something in the chat. Okay. All right. So continuing on, the other thing that will be really, really important for you as you start the school year is to prioritize what is absolutely essential in your curriculum and what are those essential prerequisite skills that students need that they may have missed. And the reason that this is really important is because if we can identify what is absolutely essential in our discipline, so if I am a biology teacher, what is absolutely essential for students in the content of biology, then I can prioritize my time, my lab activities, my face-to-face, and my asynchronous work to really align with what's essential. That is going to be really important next year because we don't know what kind of format students are going to be in and how much actual face-to-face time you will have with them. It's also really important for you to think about what the essential content was from the year before, because although we don't want to spend the whole first marking period reviewing what students missed, there are going to be places throughout the year where we are going to have to do a little bit of spiraling to make sure that we can cover grade level appropriate content and also kind of recycle and kind of go back and spiral back to the stuff they might have missed. And so by identifying what's essential, it will really help us to do that and identify places as it comes up in the curriculum that we're going to need to spiral and maybe refresh students' memories because they might not have mastered it last year because of the circumstances. So those are just some overall general things I wanted you to think about before we really get into the science-specific stuff. The other comment I wanted to make is regarding assessments. It is going to be more important than ever to know where your students are throughout the school year and what they know. You are going to be differentiating like you've never done before because of that difference in learning students experienced over those 3 months at the end of last school year. And so you're going to need at the very beginning of the school year to get a feel for where your students are. And a great tool to do that, if you don't have a tool to kind of assess what they've learned and where they're coming in a general standpoint, SAS also has some really great assessment builder tools that are aligned to Pennsylvania standards, anchors, and eligible content. So if you want to get just a broad feel for where your students are coming to you at the start of the school year, I would highly encourage you to explore some of the assessment questions in SAS. This assessment builder tool, I absolutely love the questions. They have multiple choice, they have open-ended. You will need to create a SAS account in order to use the assessment builder feature as a side note. The other thing that's going to be super important for you to think about this year is how you're using formative assessments. Because not only are you going to want to perform a diagnostic assessment at the start of your year to kind of see where your kids are, where are their learning gaps, where can we accelerate the content, you may find that your students come in not missing all that much. Or on the flip side, you may find your students are missing a lot of foundational knowledge when they come to you. So as you are going through your curriculum, it is going to be so important for you constantly to have a pulse on where your students are by using formative assessments. Regardless if you're face-to-face or whether you're virtual, there are some really great online tools that can be used to really assess what your students know in a variety of different forms. Some of my favorites are Flipgrid. Flipgrid allows students to do voice recordings. So you could ask a simple question that's very open-ended to kind of get a feel for where students are. Teachers really love Google Forms. It's a really simple way to collect information. And I think many of you are probably familiar with Kahoot and some of the data features that come out after a student completes a Kahoot. But anyway, the bottom line is constantly assessing students to find out where they are is going to be more important than ever as you're supporting students throughout next school year. All right, so now I'd like to get into the science-specific content of this webinar and really talk about how we can support good, hands-on, collaborative, inquiry-based science if kids are working at home or if they're working with us but have to be socially distanced, because that's definitely a challenge. So before we get into that, I'm just going to stop for a moment. Are there any questions on the importance of identifying essential content so you can really streamline the content that you're covering, the use of assessments, or this whole idea of the COVID slide? So I'm going to be quiet for a moment. If you have a question, I'd love for you to just post it in the chat, or a thought, please feel free to post it in the chat. And you're also welcome to unmute yourself too. I'd love for this to be an interactive session. Okay, just things to think about. I'm not trying to stress you out with more, but these are just really important things to think about so that we don't end up spending the first quarter of the year reviewing, because we don't want to fall into that same trap as the Hurricane Katrina students where we're making lifelong impacts that they never get that grade level content. All right, so let's move in and let's talk science. And again, feel free to please unmute yourself or type something in the chat as we go. I want this to be interactive as we go through a little hands-on science activity for you to see what this could look like. So hands-on learning in science is still possible even if kids are working from home. This actually reminds me of the days of like kitchen chemistry lessons where students were doing at-home activities with things found in the recycling bin or their kitchen. There are a lot of things we can still do if kids are working remotely. And there's a lot of ways we can still get kids to collaborate in person, even though we don't want them sharing materials or being within 3 to 6 feet from one another. So what really works well in live science instruction prior to this COVID issue still is really good practice, whether kids are online or face-to-face. I am a huge fan of the 5E science lesson planning model. And although we as science teachers probably do this quite often, I think it's important to remind ourselves of this lesson plan format because we want to be including all of these different 5Es regardless of the mode of instruction. So the idea of the 5Es, actually, you see it quite often used in terms of the next generation science standards, but it's good with our Pennsylvania science standards as well. The idea is that throughout the course of either one lesson or even the course of a unit, students are experiencing each of these 5 E's to really, really incorporate inquiry and uncover their curiosity, which we know is the foundation of science instruction. So the idea of the 5 E's is that we begin by engaging students and really hooking into their prior knowledge. And this is commonly done with a phenomenon. And what's beautiful about our content in science is there's phenomenon all around us. I'm looking out my window right now and it is downpouring. That's a great example of something that would be a phenomenon. What's going on with the weather today? How is this hurricane that's happening in the southern part of our country impacting my weather up here? That's just one example as I look out the window. But phenomenon is all around us. And so how can we engage students in a topic we're about to teach? It can be a video, it can be a demonstration, it could be a picture. But the whole idea is we want kids to be thinking about ways they've maybe experienced this, or just getting them to really ask good questions. Because again, questioning is a foundational concept in science. So after the engagement phase, we then get into exploration. That's where students have an opportunity to really work with the content and try to answer the questions that they developed in the engage phase. And this is where that hands-on exploration in science occurs. In traditional instruction, we typically do the instruction, then we give kids time to explore. This is actually flipped. We want kids to explore, generate questions, try to formulate answers to their questions on their own with hands-on manipulatives, so that when we get to the 3rd E, which is explanation, kids have a little bit more context for the content. The explanation phase is where either students start to answer their own questions based on what they did in the exploration phase, or this is where we as the teacher provide an explanation to the concept that we are trying to teach. For example, if I was doing something outside with this lesson on hurricanes or heavy rain, this is where I would give my direct instruction. It could be an article, it could be a video, it could be, again, like a demonstration. However, you would give students explicit instruction on a specific content. The next E is elaboration. This is where kids then, so they've explored on their own, they've asked questions, you as the educator have helped them develop a little bit of an understanding of the content. Now kids need to apply that understanding to try to make sense of what they're seeing. The last of the E's is evaluation, and this is where we actually assess whether or not a student understands the concept that we are trying to teach. So I am a huge fan of the 5 E's because it really reinforces inquiry, it gets kids asking questions, it incorporates a lot of the nature of science content, but it's a way to get the hands-on component along with the direct instruction of the content. And so regardless of whether you're teaching kids virtually or if you're bringing kids in face-to-face, when you are creating your learning experiences, I want you to be thinking about, okay, so did I incorporate something that will engage kids? Am I giving kids an opportunity to explore? Am I giving kids an opportunity to elaborate on what they learned? And making sure that every topic you teach somehow incorporates all of these 5 E's. What I have found from teachers that I work with is sometimes all of the 5 E's are done in one lesson plan. Sometimes there's a whole lesson just on the engage phase where kids are asking questions, exploring, that kind of thing. The second lesson maybe is like a day or two where kids are doing their own lab activities. Maybe it's a day or 2 days of explain. It really is up to you on how you do it. You just really want to be intentional to think about the incorporation of all of these 5 E's. What I often see when it comes to remote learning or the fear of not allowing kids to collaborate is that we just do the explain phase and forget about the others. If we want kids to get a deep understanding of the content, it's important to be incorporating all of those 5 E's. So a question I often get is, how do you do the explore phase if kids are working remotely or can't be face-to-face? And so I'd like to take a few minutes and I want to actually do like a model activity with you so you can see what that could look like. The other thing I did want to share before I get into that is I have a lesson plan template that I will share with you. Everybody who is registered for the webinar, I have your email addresses, so I will send you this PowerPoint along with all the links at the end of the session so you have access to all of the hyperlinks I'm talking about. One of my colleagues created this amazing lesson planner that I think is just wonderful when you think about a lesson or a topic you're teaching and making sure you're incorporating the 5 E's. So when you get a copy of this Google Doc, when you're thinking about, okay, I'm going to teach a lesson today on chemical reactions. Okay, think about, okay, what can I do to engage my kids? And maybe that phase, kids are at home for that. How can I do it that way? Okay, I have kids face-to-face 2 days a week. I'm going to do the explain and the extend phase when they're face-to-face. So it's just kind of nice to think about where you're using the 5 E's on a specific topic, how you're going to do it. And up at the top are a series of different methods you could do to incorporate those E's. You want to make sure you're providing kids with a variety where they're not just watching a video, doing a discussion, watching a video, doing a discussion. So how can you incorporate things like discussions, collaborative tasks, reflection time, review and practice, and so forth? I'm a big fan of this. This has helped me a lot as I've been thinking through some lesson plan development. All right, so let's dive in. I'd like for us to experience this from a learner. So you're going to put your student hat on for a minute. I'm going to use one of my favorite new collaborative tools called Google Jamboard. So in the chat, I am going to give you all access to the Jamboard. Okay, so if you can go to the chat, and if you can click on the Jamboard, it should open up something that looks similar to what you see on my slide. And I am going to actually enter the Jamboard myself. So Google Jamboard is a collaboration tool that is free within your Google Apps for Educators. And so the way you would access this is by opening a Chrome tab on your computer and going to that little waffle, and you'll see an icon that looks like this, which is the Jamboard icon. Jamboard is more or less like a digital whiteboard that you can have students collaborate and interact on. This reminds me a lot of Padlet, or even like jazzed up like a Google Doc. What I love about Google Jamboard is that I can give kids editing access just like I would give them access to a Google Doc, so that all of you should be able to type, write, add to this slide as we talk. So for our little demo lesson, what I'd like to do is I'm going to work you through the 5 E's, and I want to start with actually the pre-E, which is pre-evaluate. I want to see what you already know. So let's put on our student hats, and I want you to think about, what do you already know about sound? Because my lesson I'm going to do with you today is all about sound waves and resonance. So the way you can use the Google Jamboard is on the left, you'll see a variety of features. You have a pen feature, which allows you to just literally write on the whiteboard. So you're welcome to use that if you'd like. I'm going to erase that, looks awful. So you can do that. And you're welcome to just kind of play around too, so you can learn the tool. You also are welcome to use the sticky note, which is what I did. And you can type anything on the sticky note and it will post if you want to just type your words. If you have a picture that you think would represent what you're thinking, you're welcome to find a picture. So when you click on add image, it will allow you to search Google and upload the image directly there. So I'm going to be quiet for a moment. And I'd love for you just to play around with Jamboard, but also just give me one thing at least that you already know about sound. If you're having any trouble with the Jamboard, you're welcome to unmute yourself or add to the chat. Nice. And you can move around anything on the Jamboard.
I don't know why I'm not getting it here.
Cindy, what are you trying to post? Would you like to write? Do you want to do a sticky note, a picture?
I tried to write and I tried to do a sticky note, but I'm not getting anything. Like nothing will.
Oh. Let me do a testing. You might have to make sure you hit, after you do your sticky note and type something, hit save and then hit cancel, and it should appear. You can also at any point delete your own posts. See, I love doing this with science teachers because your understanding of sound is quite sophisticated. So while people are finishing up, I'd love for you just to unmute yourself. What do you think of Google Jamboard based on just this basic, this is the first time we're using it, but what do you think? Something you could use with your students? Oh, nice.
I think the kids might have too much fun playing with this.
Yeah.
I like it. I like it. Like,
So Cindy, were you able to get it to work?
yeah, I
Okay.
did.
So I'm just a big fan. It's just another collaboration tool when kids are working online. I've even used Google Jamboard when kids are face-to-face, but you want them to share ideas or share resources. This is just a really nice, easy place to do it. I really am a huge fan of Padlet, which reminds me a lot of this, but in the free version of Padlet, you're limited to the number of pads you can make. So this is just, again, because it's connected to the Google Educator Suite, it's just kind of another easy thing to use with students. Very nice. Okay, keep the Jamboard open because you'll notice I have different slides and frames I'm going to ask for you to collaborate on. So we will come back to the Jamboard as we go through each of the E's. All right, so you guys know quite a bit already about sound. Awesome. All right, so if you want to mute yourself, and I would also encourage you to turn your volume down because I'm going to show you a little video and the guy's voice is very piercing. And so just want to make sure you turn your video down or else you'll be deafened. So what I'd like to do is I'm going to show you a video that connects to this lesson on sound that I'm about to teach. This is my phenomenon. So this is what I'm using for my first of the E's, my engage. As you are watching the video, I just want you to make observations. And what I'm going to ask then is that you post the observations on the next frame in the Jamboard. And the way you access the next frame is by simply clicking on the arrow at the top right where it says 1/10. There's 10 slides on this Jamboard. So I will ask you to follow the same procedure you did before, either posting a sticky, a picture, or writing text. But I want you to make some observations. And you can do this after you watch. The video is very short. I don't want you to miss anything. All right, so you guys ready? All right.
Yes! All right. Yes! Glass number 90. And that's proof that it's not a trick. That was too easy, man.
Okay, I just saw in the chat there's no video. Is no one able to see the video?
I can see it.
Oh, okay.
I can't see it. I still have the
The Jamboard?
Jamboard.
Okay, so do you see me? Or
I
my
do.
screen, the slide deck?
I just see you I see your picture and I see the Jamboard.
Okay, so I'm gonna have you actually exit out of the Jamboard just so you can go back to seeing my screen. And then what I will do is send you the link again to the Jamboard in the chat as soon as we're done with this. So can you see my screen now where it says engage and we have a little punk rocker?
Should I just close the Jamboard tab?
Yep, I would just exit out of the Jamboard.
Dave, you might want to go down and click on the Zoom app thing again.
Oh, there we go. I got it.
Good. Okay.
That
So
worked,
we're gonna watch one more time. And so again, remember, you're going to have to reflect on observations based on what you see. And I'm actually going to try something. I'm going to make this big so you can really see what's going on.
Yes! All right. Yes! Glass number 90. And that's proof that it's not a trick. That was too easy, man. Number 93 has 5 today.
Okay, so, okay, so I'm gonna show you one more video that just, again, like really focuses on the glass. Again, I would like you to be making observations and thinking about what you saw. Now, before we get into that, I actually think it might be helpful for you to post some things on the first video before we move to the second. So I'm gonna actually backtrack and I'm going to put the link to the Jamboard again in the chat. So if anyone had to exit out. Okay, so click on the Jamboard again, and we're now on frame 2. I'd like you to just make some observations based on what you saw in that video. Okay, so I see the word tone. I see it, the observations, there's a straw that's bouncing around. He listens to the pitch first and then matches it, which is an interesting observation. Okay, the glass breaks. That's a great observation. Oh, you science people, you show-offs. If the glass resonates at a certain frequency, it will shatter. Okay, so you guys obviously know quite a bit about it, but so think about this from a student's perspective. Would that be engaging for your students to see that video? Heck yeah, I think so. And do you think it would lead them to a lot of questions on what on earth is going on in that video? Yes, and that's what science is all about, making observations and asking questions. That's why this engage phase is so important. So I could easily assign this video to my students asynchronously to watch, or I could do something similar live. I could show it to kids, I could show the video, we could talk about it, they could post to the Jamboard, we could talk about the responses. So regardless of the mode, this is a great kickoff. I recently saw another lesson where it was using kind of kitchen chemistry, and the lesson was all about acids and bases and chemical reactions. And the teacher, through video, she recorded herself, or she could have done this live in a Zoom session or a Google Meet session, but she had a balloon and a piece of fruit, and she squeezed the fruit onto the balloon, and the balloon popped. So she did a very similar activity, but it was, instead of a YouTube video, it was her going through an activity. These are all things that you could do to really engage students, whether they're live or face-to-face, or sorry, live or virtual. All right. So I'm going to show you another video, and I just want you to see if it changes any of your observations. All right, I don't know if that gave everybody a headache, like started to give me. So we'll stop it there because I think the purpose is there. So if we can go back to the Jamboard, again, we're on frame 2. Are there any new observations you can make based on now this additional video you just viewed? So I'll give you a moment to post any observations you made. Okay, the glass, which we think of as a solid, definitely changed shape. All right, great observations, team. All right, so now let's take it a step further. And I'm now making the transition from the engage to the explore phase. And the way I'm going to do that is by now asking my students to create I wonder questions. Okay, so you just viewed this phenomenon, or maybe viewed a picture, viewed a demonstration, however you started and got kids hooked. Now, what are some questions you have based on what you saw? So this may be a little challenging, so put on your student hat, because I know you may already know the answer to this. But if you are a student and you just saw this video, now let's flip to frame 3. So click on the arrow up in your Jamboard to frame 3. And I'd now like you to post for me, what questions do you have based on what you observed. Okay, can we do this? I'm sure your students would want to break some glass. Okay, so what is it about the sound that makes that glass move? Like, that was pretty strange. Sound doesn't make me move. Thank you guys for putting on your student hats. I appreciate it. Yeah, so what was making that glass wiggle? Yeah, was it a special kind of glass? I would be curious to know that. Great. So can you see how I'm kind of transitioning now? And I tried to pick like a general kind of activity that could apply to elementary or secondary. So you may think of modifications to something similar based on the grade level you teach. All right, so now the next phase. So I'm starting to lead into the explore, and now I want to really support students in giving them the second E, which is time to explore this concept. So what I could do, if I had more people, I would potentially put you into breakout rooms, but we're not going to do that for the sake of time and for the sake of today's structure. But I'm a big fan of breakout rooms in Zoom, or even getting kids, they'll be socially distanced, but getting them somewhat together so they can collaborate. They also can collaborate on Google Docs, or again, like the Jamboard, like we're about to do. But now what I want to support my students in is take those questions that you just developed, the I wonder questions, and let's make those into testable questions. And this is where me as the teacher would need to maybe reinforce the idea of variables, hypotheses, all of those nature of science concepts that are really important. So how do we take this question, like, is it a special kind of glass? How do we make that testable? And so as science teachers, that's where we really start to get into this inquiry that we love about our subject. Okay, so we're not actually going to do that, but that would just be the next phase. So creating these into actual testable questions with variables, hypothesis, and so forth, to now get into the explore phase where I want kids to test their question. Now, this breaking glass may be a little complicated, so this may not be something that each student tests individually. It might be something that you tell students, I have these supplies, and I need you to create a testable question based on these 3 supplies that I have, and I'm going to do it as a demo, and as a class, we're going to explore. That's one way. This example I saw that was about chemical reactions with the balloon and the acid in the fruit. Easily, you could give students some supplies and they could create or test their own question, or you could have kids doing that part at home using supplies they have. Like, okay, go into your kitchen, find 3 things, and design an experiment based on that. So those are just a couple ideas to get kids to still explore, even if they aren't face-to-face, or if they are face-to-face, maybe they're just creating the testable question, but you as the teacher are actually going to pick one of the testable questions to do as a demo. You're still going through those science inquiry processes that are so important to our discipline. Okay, then the next phase is the explain. And this is where we either have students develop their own explanations using formats like the claim, evidence, reasoning format. We have kids either do a reading assignment to get a little bit more information. Maybe they're watching a YouTube video. Maybe they're doing a research project, but they're developing an understanding of what they experienced and what they explored and what's the scientific concept behind that. So this is where I would give students information about resonance. I would talk about sound waves. I would talk about this whole idea of vibrations and that kind of thing, depending on the grade level I was teaching. I would probably do it with a YouTube video, or maybe I would provide a lecture or a lesson, or I would give them a blog to read. It doesn't matter. It would be how you give your direct instruction. Then what I would do is challenge my students to think about this idea of sound and resonance, and where else is there evidence of that? So we saw the singer breaking glass. Can you think of another situation where this phenomenon is present? And then the last of the 5 E's is evaluate. How do we know that students actually understood the science and all of the nature of science concepts in this lesson? And I'm a huge fan of getting kids to verbally communicate the results. If you look at the science and engineering practices, one of the last practices is the ability to communicate articulately what you did and what you learned. And so I love the tool Flipgrid, and I also love Screencastify Submit is a new tool that right now is free for educators, where again, you can assign students a prompt and they verbally record the response. You also could have students take a quiz in the evaluate phase. You could have them do a writing prompt. It really doesn't matter. I think you're all masters at the evaluation piece, but how do we actually know that they learned the concept at hand? So that's the idea of a 5E model. And we went through it somewhat right here in a virtual setting. And I feel pretty good about all of the nature of science we still were able to accomplish, even though we weren't physically able to work together or had like actual manipulatives in our hands. The other resource I want to share with you before I open it up for your collaboration time is a resource that comes from one of my favorite blog posts, which is from Caitlin Tucker. And it talks about how do we get kids to collaborate when they can't be face-to-face or they can't touch. And there's some really great tools using like Google Forms, Kahoot, things like that, online tools, opportunities to give kids, like we did on the Jamboard, list all the questions you can think about. Now as a class, we're going to talk about that. So there's a lot of online tools where students can still collaborate and work together. It just looks a little different than what we traditionally think of collaboration, which is kids all huddled together, working together. They're still working together. They're still sharing ideas. You're still gaining an understanding based on other people's perspectives. It's just done maybe through a Google Doc or by hearing somebody in a Flipgrid and so forth. I have a few resources, and I tried to be very selective of what I wanted to share with you today that I think are really supportive of science instruction, regardless of the mode coming this fall. The first resource I want to share with you is Exploratorium. This comes out of the Da Vinci Science Center, and they have these things called science snacks that are really great little clips of activities that students can do with supplies they have at home. So if you're looking for just some hands-on inquiry-based activities, this is a great place to look. I found some really cool activities I know I want to do with my nieces based on activities I found there. The other resource I want to share is something called Start Soul. And SOUL stands for Self-Organized Learning Experience. The idea is that you give students a question that's not easily Googleable, and you give them time to research using the internet or whatever they have at their disposal to try to answer that question. This is really intended to be done in groups. I've seen teachers do this very well in a remote setting by giving kids like a Google Doc or having them get together in Google Hangouts Meet and working together to answer a question, and then together collaboratively creating a visual representation to answer their question. So it's a really simple model, but it works really well to get kids to explore, learn more, and research, all within the context of a science concept. The other resource I'm really fond of right now is PBS Learning Media. If you're looking for asynchronous content, they have some really good videos, some really good web quests, and some really good online activities that are connected to science standards in Pennsylvania. The following two resources are Pennsylvania specific. I just want you to be aware of them. The PDE STEM Toolkit, which is located in OER Commons, and obviously the resources on SAS. So I am going to, right now, give you access to the slide deck. I am going to put it in the chat so all of you have access, and then I'd love to open it up. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. I'd love to open it up to questions, thoughts, and we can try to group problem solve together. So give me a moment to get the slide deck into the chat for you, and while I'm doing that, you are welcome to unmute yourself and throw a question out for the group.
Okay, one question I have for the group is something I've been hearing from parents of mostly elementary kids, is that they have to log in, or they did in the spring, they had to log in, and then there were all of these different apps that the kids were using. Is there a way that we can decide that we're going to use maybe these 2 or 3 apps? Even though there's lots of bells and whistles, there are a lot of different apps out there. I kind of feel like we need to keep it as simple as we can.
Mary, you bring up a really good point. When students are working from home, it is a heavy lift for families who are trying to support their students, but also be working at home and supporting a lot of other things. And so keeping it simplified, I think, is so important as well. It's so much less about all the jazzy tools. The tools are intended to help you and to engage students, but again, we don't want it to be a burden. And so I think as consistent as you can be, Feedback we heard from parents too is they were never completely clear on like what the student was actually supposed to be learning, what they were held accountable for, and what like they actually had to turn in. And so I recently was in a webinar similar to this, and a lesson plan template was shared that I thought was awesome to send to parents. So each week the teacher said, like, Monday, here's the topic, here's the outcome, here's what students are actually supposed to learn, here's the objective of the lesson, and here's what's actually due, like what your kids need to turn in. And having that for each day was really helpful for parents in supporting their kids, because I think it was very confusing for parents to know, like, what are they supposed to be doing and like what's actually due to be turned in. I don't know if that's helpful or not. And anyone else is welcome to chime in. The other piece too, to tag along with that, I think it's really important that when we are giving asynchronous learning opportunities for kids, kids understand what the expectation is. And so being really clear on like, this is what you'll be able to do at the end of this lesson. And can you, at the end of the lesson, doing a self-check, like, okay, I'm able to do these things, I've learned what I need to do, is really important. I think there was a lot of confusion for students in the spring on it, not exactly sure the purpose of the different activities and what they truly were supposed to get out of it. Other questions?
In the middle school, where the teachers are moving, so I'm gonna have to take an elevator to get downstairs if I have a cart with me, and I have 4 minutes to get there. So I'm not sure what I'm gonna be able to take with me when I go from room to room. But today, I mean, just seeing something that you did, like this engaging video and the Jamboard, that was helpful to me.
Oh,
good. My big piece though, we do a lot of microscope work in life science, so I'm not really sure what to do with that piece. Were you in any kinds of workshops or anything about how students share equipment or anything like that, or is that according to your school?
So that's a really good question. I don't want to give you any bad feedback. I'll just share kind of my thoughts at this point. So I've been working with a lot of tech ed teachers, and that's been a question that's come up because of the tech ed equipment. And the guidance that I received from the International Technology Engineering Association was that you need to be wiping down the equipment between uses. Kids need to be washing their hands between stations, or from using the equipment, they need to go wash their hands. And that students should be sitting, if you have lab tables, where they're at least 3 feet apart. So that's the only guidance I've really received regarding that. So I think technically you could probably be able to use microscopes if you had them spaced apart and you were really wiping them down and kids were washing their hands after using them. That would be one workaround. I think there's also like a lot of really good life science videos that would show students, they don't learn the manipulatives of using the microscope, but would see what's under the lens without actually physically doing it.
There's a lot of videos, but like the wow factor is actually like looking at a slide, seeing hardly anything, and then actually seeing it themselves using the microscope. So I guess the hard part is they just really struggle to focus, and I can't help them focus because I can't get that close to them. So yeah.
And I think this year will be all about small group instruction too, and rotating kids through.
Right.
So maybe you have stations where you have like a small population of students using the microscope for the whole class period or half a class period, and you have a small group doing something else to limit the number of kids who are using equipment on a certain day too.
Right. Okay.
So you bring up good points. Other thoughts?
Thank you.
Well, I will stop the recording with that. Thank you all for attending. I'm going to stay on the line if you have any additional questions you want to talk through, but I'm going to now stop the recording.